Hey there, everyone. Good morning and happy Friday. Hopefully, everyone's had a great week. Maybe some of you are just ending your weeks. Maybe you're just starting. Hold on. Push the cat. She was shaking the table, encouraging her to move. So, hopefully, you've all had a wonderful week. I know that there's definitely been a few more, sadly, layoffs. So I wanted to put together a quick live where we talked about data engineering, how to become a data engineer. If you've got questions, this is really a time for you guys. If you have questions, if you have any concerns or things you just like to bring up, you can feel free to just post them in the chat. But yeah, overall, I think I've I actually haven't had too many people reach out in terms of like looking for work, but I've definitely seen plenty in terms of layoffs and things of that nature. But I think there's still plenty in the terms of data engineering roles that I see pop up. I think the hard thing there in general is that most of them always tend to, as per usual, be for mid-level and seniors, and that tends to, I think, be the biggest challenge for a lot of people who are trying to break into data engineering. So usually, if that's the case, and I usually try to give the advice to most people who are trying to break into the data engineering world to not focus so heavily on titles. So not always being interested purely in becoming, a data engineer by title. Hello. Not purely becoming interested as a data engineer by title, but also looking in terms of becoming a data analyst or becoming some sort of data adjacent role that might be an easier initial kind of first step. So I think that's something I still generally recommend to most people in terms of like how to start to break in. I think thank you. The other major fear is obviously things like ChatGPT and LLMs kind of coming in. Like someone just asked, should I learn SQL? And I think I saw someone post the other day an interesting point where they were like, what's the point of learning SQL if ChatGPT can just write it for me? And I think even in that world, I think Chat or SQL is a useful skill because you still have to know what is the right thing to write. I've at this point used ChatGPT and Copilot a lot, and I'm still having to correct my fair share of little mistakes that it makes, or just look at it and be like, oh, I should have asked it this way, or there's still some logic that you have to implement and look at when you see things kind of put out by some of these models. So that's why I generally still think that learning SQL will continue to be that baseline skill as well as with programming. It just gets you to a point that you can know what you're actually doing. I don't know why she's deciding to be with you right now. She's so funny. Yeah, so I still say SQL is a solid skill to kind of pick up. Let's see. Someone just started as a data engineer. Congrats. Let's see. How do I move from data analysis to data engineering? I have 4 years of experience. Generally, the way I recommend people move from data analyst positions to data engineering positions is you take on some projects that obviously are data engineering-esque. You either ask your manager or you somehow get connected to a team that's doing it, and just try to help them out. Maybe you're still doing your full-time data analysis work, but like maybe on the side you're like building an ETL for another team, and that can sometimes help you move laterally. And then eventually, once you've got a few of those projects, you can, apply to a new job where you say like, yeah, I worked on these data engineering projects, and then it's a little easier to switch roles. Which ETL tools do you recommend learning? Well, that's, I guess, I mean, some people don't consider Airflow technically an ETL tool, but I think Airflow and Mage are both solid solutions that you can look into learning. If you prefer like more code and technical stuff, Azure Data Factory is pretty big in enterprises. So like most Microsoft solutions tend to be very big in enterprises. So it really will be somewhat dependent on what companies you work for. Some companies, if you're more mid-market, and like in the UK, Matillion is big over there. But it really, the way I usually do it is like look at the roles that I want and see which company and see what tools they're recommending that are, or not recommending, but see what tools they want, kind of gather that information, and then that can give you information in terms of what you should be learning. So it's kind of analyzing all the roles that you're interested in, and that should kind of tell you what ETL tools you want. But you can't go wrong with things like Airflow, Azure Data Factory, or things that are currently being heavily utilized. What's this? I'm not great with Python, but so in SQL. I work as a system analyst. Do I have any chance to break into data engineering field? Yeah, I mean, I think anyone can essentially break into it. Part of getting better, I feel like, at these skills, if you want to become a data engineer or any role adjacent to that, is taking on a role where maybe you're a junior and getting challenged, right? Like being in a position where you're being forced to become better. And I think that's usually one way you can kind of get better at those skills and not just be so. So yeah, I think it's totally possible. I think I'd look for more opportunities to challenge yourself in those areas. Obviously, you have to go eventually from so to good at SQL, and from not being good at Python to being good at it, or being good at another programming language, because you will have to make that jump eventually. Let's see, what's this? So I have to do this one. So in terms of like, ETL tools and projects for college freshers, if you're just getting started, you don't, I don't think you need to be using all the fancy tools. I think you can definitely use something, again, I think I referenced earlier, Airflow, Mage, something that's free and you can just run yourself. And then usually what's a good place to start is to find some websites to scrape. I, for example, last or 2 weeks ago, did a project where I scraped like a Washington Senate. So it's like a legal Washington Senate, like where all the laws are essentially made, site. And basically it tracks every day what bills are going through the Senate. And there's a table. It's just a table that's online. And I scraped it and said, okay, here's all the bills that are going through. Here are all the people connected to it. You can actually scrape the information down from what's in the bill. And then you can store that and then start doing some sort of stuff on it. But there are other sites like that are similar, where it's like a clearly put together table, and you can kind of build something from there. So this is the fun thing, is when I start on... Let's see. Let's see if it'll come back. I lost my... Let's see my audio. Yeti. Okay. Sorry about that. I was going to say, whenever I'm on calls, her name's Mia. She decides she likes to be the center of attention. So I apologize. So yes. I think that's always a great way. And then you can use, again, something like Airflow to automate the process and scrape it down into something like Postgres or something that keeps it free. All right, we'll have to figure out a way to win there. She's enjoying the attention. All right, let's see. We've got a few questions since she decided. Let's see. So someone else, I think, is asking, I've been working as a data analyst for 6 months, but I only use tools like Power BI and SQL, learning Python, and ETL in general. On the outside, still would be general experience in the area to help me. Yeah, I mean, just learning the skills is great, but you're going to always have to like find experience, right? Like you're going to have to take on ETL projects and things like that to really get yourself to that next level. But obviously you're learning the right skills, so that gets you, going in the right direction. Is the question how to become a better data engineer in the scope of this live, and what's the answer if so? I think the way you become a better data engineer is, like, first you build your baseline technical skills, right? I keep meaning to kind of put a post out about this, but you build your baseline technical skills. And that starts you in the right direction, right? You get good at SQL, you get good at Python. How do you do that? One, you obviously learn the basics, but then two, you start working for teams that will maybe challenge you to be better. Teams that have a high engineering culture, which just generally means they have a lot of good practices. They challenge you to write better code. You look at their code and you're like, wow, my code sucks. And that kind of stuff pushes you to be better in that realm. At a certain point, though, you get good at those skills. Then you kind of generally work on how you design things, your design skills. Do you build solid ETLs? Do you build good tables and data warehouse kind of, models and things of that nature? So you kind of build those skills. And then that's that. After you've kind of built the core technical skills, it's a lot about what's your ability to, drive projects forward, to communicate with teams, to keep people, going forward and incentivized to do work and collaborating and things that are not technical. Like there's a certain point where you just hit this threshold where, you can become more technical. You can learn broader technical skills. So you just pick up every new technology. But if you really want to become more advanced and like essentially higher leveled at things, you have to challenge yourself in other areas. Like, again, things that are more softer in terms of skill sets, because that's how you essentially drive value. The way to think about it is, or the way I think about it is, when you're a data engineer and you're building like a data pipeline, that data pipeline can only affect so many people, right? It's a limit on how many people. But if you then are, level above and you're like driving the coding standards for a team where 3 people are now, building whatever 3 data pipelines that, has now 3N in terms of how many people they impact, that's more impactful than when you were doing just 1N. And then again, if you take a step above that, if you're then like defining maybe the data strategy or the plans for the larger organization of the data engineering org, and that's impacting 8 people, right? That's now 8N in terms of your level of possible impact. So generally, your goal is to not just be pure IC to a degree, but like, go higher level in how you deliver those skills. It doesn't mean become a manager. It just means consider other ways you can like drive impact. How can you scale your impact is usually the way I think about this. This is always a challenge. Yeah, I mean, so junior data engineer positions, I think, are always harder to find. I think because data engineering is this broader skill set where it's like you have to know the code, maybe sometimes some data analysis, maybe sometimes, data pipelines, ETLs, things that maybe you weren't taught in school. So you don't see as many junior positions. And this is why I tell most people, like, look for a data analyst position and then move into data engineering slowly, because, yeah, finding one out of college, don't get too stuck on that role, because you'll likely find one eventually. Because everyone needs data engineers. They just want to make sure they're hiring people that are, I think, a little more experienced. Let's see. I have a master's degree in computer science. How can I prepare myself to become a data engineer? I'd say in order to prepare yourself to become a data engineer, what I usually would say is, if you already have programming, SQL is generally a big place that I'll see that like CS and programmers aren't as experienced in. They'll like know like the basics, like how to insert. They'll know CRUD. They'll know basic selects. But if you get more on the complex analytical side, that they tend to be weaker there. So that's somewhere I'd always recommend. With that, also data warehousing and ETLs. So learning how those work, learning how they operate, learning how to build one. Again, you can use various tools out there to kind of build them, and how to actually manage big data sets. That's kind of the next step. Generally, like, more programmers tend to, the way I think about it, programmers tend to think in like single transactions, where like, you have some transaction, it comes into a website, what happens? Whereas data engineers tend to think about data sets. So like, I've got this giant data set, I've got to like, create something else out of it. So that tends to be some of the differences that I think you see between the two specialties. I don't think so. Someone's saying like, I think Scala adoption is kind of on its way out. Rust is going to. Okay, please don't step on my cable. Oh yeah, I did that. Okay. So I have seen like Scala is like limited in terms of like how much it gets adopted. Like for some companies they love it, and for some companies they don't. I feel like Rust in particular isn't conducive to doing like data engineering activities. It's conducive to processing data, so it's going to be like a great choice. And I know several companies who've used Rust as their underlying like data processing basically language, because it can be more efficient. But I don't think it's a great tool for data engineers to code in, because it just tends to be heavier, right? Like you have to you have to know more to use it. Whereas like Python is very approachable by most people, and same in Scala is arguably more approachable than Rust. So I think like in terms of like tools, it's just these are easier tools to use than Rust. And Rust is great again for building data solutions. Again, I have a friend who's built like a streaming solution using Rust. It works great, mostly because of Rust, and he gets a lot of really smart engineers because of the fact that he uses Rust, and Rust attracts a certain person to use it. So yeah. Oh, and then you also asked, or will Java take its place? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen too much Java. Like, I feel like I've seen more Scala than I've seen Java, but I could be wrong. But we've had this like Java Scala thing, I think, for a while, like even since Hadoop. So, to some degree, it'll be just the teams that are deciding those things. Let's see. Hi, I do have a question here. This is interesting. Hi, I have a question. Do data engineers need to learn Hadoop ecosystems like MapReduce, Hive, Pig when cloud solutions are trending now? So I imagine this is somewhat dependent on where you live. If you are if you're in the US, definitely Hadoop, like Hadoop and Pig, I don't see. And even Hive has kind of fallen out of fashion as people have moved over to Presto and Trito. But obviously, then on top of that, there's things like Snowflake. But I do feel like I still see like Hive and Hadoop. They're still being managed, but oftentimes they're being managed offshore from the US. So I know a few companies where they're enterprise companies in the US, and they have offshore IT teams, and they'll manage their Hive instances. So Hive in itself, and managing Hive and Hadoop is just, I think, too expensive for most companies to try to manage in the US if you have like engineers in the US. So you'll usually see like those skill sets still exist, but just generally not here, because no one wants to pay for it here, sadly. Let's see. Do you think it's necessary to have a degree in computer science to get a job as a DA or any role that involves SQL? And from there, will it be possible for me to be DE? Well, my degree is in information systems, which I feel like isn't pure. It's not a pure computer science degree, right? Like half of my classes were business classes, and then half of them were basically some intro programming. I didn't even have to take data structures and algorithms. I did that out after school because I was like, well, I need to do this to get a job. So yeah, you can totally get a job as a DA and then move to DE without a CS degree. Right? Like it's not a necessity. Let's see. Yes, someone said hi, Mia. She's now gone and hidden to sleep, I think. Let's see. Here, are low-code, no-code tools becoming best practices, or should we still prefer code for things like testing? I think you said VS Code, CI/CD, specifically optimization. I think low-code and no-code has a place. In particular, I've always liked finding a good balance. That's one reason I've liked Airflow. You can love it and hate it. But that's one reason I think I did like it. It was just enough code that you could control things still, right? Like too much low code or too much no code. It's always hard to like optimize and things of that nature. So finding a good balance, I think, is always good. So finding frameworks is good. I think some companies will always be some companies and some teams will always prefer the open source code-based solutions, where others will, because of budget, because of who they hired, because of their talent, will prefer low code. I don't imagine Facebook is going to low code, no code. I guess they've got Data Swarm, which is kind of lower code. It's like Airflow. But even in that world, like there's just always a need for some level of optimization. And then the question becomes, what do you want to do? Do you want to do low code work? It exists, right? Like that's every organization has it. And if you're really interested, you can find it. So yeah, when a cat gave us some advice, yeah, she was very interesting. Okay. What about cloud certifications? Is it worth it to focus attention on it, especially those that are DE related? I mean, my general advice there is don't expect like a cloud certification to get you a job. It can help, but it generally won't be like the guarantee, right? Like it's not like you get this, you'll get a job. I like them when I need to like round out my skill sets. You know, it's like okay, I've been working on GCP for like 2 years. I feel like there's a few gaps in my knowledge, and then generally certification will help there. There are other benefits to me, like you can become a partner. If you're a consultant, you can become a partner if you get these certifications. But in terms of like guaranteeing a job, it's not guaranteed. So I wouldn't recommend you looking to. Oh, wait, someone's too kind. Someone gave me where's this? Okay, well I feel like I have to thank you. So let's see. I'm in the Army and my contract ends in 2026. I'm learning Python on Code Academy, SQL, and Udemy, and AWS Cloud analytics on Code Academy. Am I on the right track? What else should I be doing? I think so. For you, if you're going to be learning all of those things, also make sure you apply them somewhere. It's kind of like learning a language, right? Like if you learn a language and then don't apply it anywhere, in a few years, it'll be gone, right? To a degree. Like maybe you can kind of bring it back a little bit, but it'll take work. So, sure, learn these skills, but then find ways to apply it. Build yourself a small project in the evenings, but it's really going to be about you building things to make sure it sticks. Because the thing about like I feel like a lot of code academies or even Coursera or anything of that nature is they've built you a path, and actually even college, right? Like they've built you a path where the answer is very clear. Right? Like there's a clear solution when they often ask you these questions in these courses. But that's not what the real world is like. And so you kind of need to go into a space where it's more ambiguous and you don't know what the right answer is. And there might not be a clear right answer where you have to make decisions on what you're building. Like, how are you going to store data? Well, which tool do you want to use? Do you want to use Postgres? Do you want to use, Snowflake? Is this for analytics? Is this not? What challenges do you run into? So, it's a good base, right? Like this will help you be introduced to these topics, but to get to that next level, don't just take a bunch of courses that are intro. Eventually you have to switch and start building things. Okay, let's see. But also thank you for the $10. It's very kind. Let's see. So many questions. Yeah, so someone also asked, I just completed a bunch of courses. What's the best way to do that? The best way to get your experience up is to build some projects. I don't know if you have anyone that needs help, but if you have any friends that need some data engineering help and owns a company and you want to give them maybe either cheap or free time to build something. But I referenced this earlier in terms of projects. There's open data sources. You can look. I think there's like this GitHub page that has a bunch of open data sources. If you want to find a unique data source, again, scraping websites is always solid. There are plenty of websites that are essentially just tables where they just give you information and you can scrape those. Again, I did that recently with my last video where I used ChatGPT to pull down some data from the Washington Senate, and you can look that up. What is the future of business analyst who works in an analytics team? That's very specific on an analytics team. I imagine like business analysts will always be somewhat necessary, even if that's not their title. I think it's always the thing. It's like that might not be your title. I think being able to translate what the business needs into something that tech people can understand will always be a necessity. Even with things like ChatGPT, right? Like there's always going to need to be this like intermediary. I think we often don't. What's the word I'm looking for? Don't appreciate the difference of knowledge that exists between the business and that exists between technology. It's a pretty big gap. Like, and it's why I see a lot of companies sometimes get taken advantage of from like technology companies, because they'll just be like, oh, we'll build you this thing, and they tell some business person. And because technology can be scary to non-tech people, they'll be like, okay, cool, you'll solve my problem. And then they'll pay them way too much money to build a WordPress website or something, right? They pay like $50,000 for a WordPress website that I could, set up for, 500 or 1,000 essentially. So there's always this gap, and being able to cross that gap and say, hey, here's what you actually need, is always worthwhile. This is always hard. You've got all these skills, or at least experience. I think the other thing is like, so you don't have any, I imagine, like actual world experience. So that's why you're maybe not getting interviews. I don't know if it works the same way wherever you're at, or if you're in the US. In the US, the best way generally to get jobs, like you can put out resumes. I remember I put out resumes for almost a year to get my first job. Um, it was an internship, but it was still in college. And then I had friends who just got referrals. Like they didn't have the same skills that I did. I was teaching them like SQL. I was teaching them how to do things. And they got jobs at like Amazon because they had been part of a business fraternity or something. So if you network, if you can get referrals from people that you know, I'm always going to say people that you know. It's not beneficial to reach out to people that don't know you on LinkedIn. Most people would just see them as themselves as being used by you, instead of something them helping you. They'll be like, oh, this person just wants me for the referral I can give. So if you know people that have a job at a company that you want, referrals generally work really well. At least that's what I've seen. Let's see. So this is funny. Like I'm senior data analyst, and I want to switch to data engineering. Is DSNA and systems design necessary, and how long would it take to learn? This is interesting because, like, to some degree, right? Like now, ChatGPT could just solve all your DSNA problems, and it's not like you even then use them at work. I imagine you do need to know a little bit about DSNA. It helps you understand how to think efficiently and how to program efficiently. At least that's how I think about it. Like algorithms aren't just about coding algorithms. It's about how you think and how you approach problems. And so that's why I think a lot of people like DSNA in terms of how to interview people. And I think system design will always be valuable, because especially in the ChatGPT world, where you can arguably say that like, oh, all the little stuff can be easily taken care of. Then it's like, okay, well, what about design? How do all these pieces go together when we have all of these weird nuances? So having a good understanding of system design is always worth it. I wouldn't skip them. How long would it take to learn? I mean, I'm still learning them, right? Like I think that's the thing. It's like, yeah, you'll start learning them now. I imagine it's how long will it take for me to learn them to get a job or to interview? I mean, you could probably do it like enough just to get the job. You could do it in like 3 to 6 months, depending on how much you focus on it. If you're really focused on it and you spend like 4 hours a day doing it, right? Or 2 hours. I guess 2 hours is probably sufficient. You don't have to go 4 hours. Then yeah, you can pick up enough to pass an interview, and then you'll learn the rest on the job. Because you don't have to be perfect at it. You just have to be good enough to pass an interview, and then from there you can get better at it. Let's see. I'm going to answer this question quickly, but yeah, someone who's a data science, basically master's student. In terms of services, you don't have to like collect them all. It's not like Pokemon, right? You can learn your core, your EC2, your S3, maybe a database like RDS. Yeah, you don't have to like go crazy. Just pick a few, kind of build out a little project. It doesn't have to be so fancy. But yeah, if you pick those, if you pick those 3, you're going to also have to learn a little bit about IAM just by, starting things up. You're going to learn a little bit about how to set up credentials, and maybe you'll, eventually learn how to set up like keys and all of that. So, it doesn't have to be fancy. Just pick a few, 2 or 3, and that's generally enough. Let's see. I was an SSIS developer. This tool automates tasks. Yeah, I remember using that. Could I consider me a data engineer if only Microsoft Stack? Yeah, it's there's always this interesting kind of line between like ETL developer and data engineer, because obviously, to a degree, a lot of ETL developers became data engineers. I think the other layer you add on to that is like, yes, you have you can kind of go more broadly than just Microsoft stack. I mean, you could be an Azure data engineer. That's a popular title I've definitely seen. But I think on top of that, you have to know some data modeling, some data warehousing, more than just building things with SSIS. But if you understand how to do that and then work with a business, I think that's where like the data engineering side comes in. And I'd also pick up a coding language and definitely SQL just to make sure it's all rounded out there. Let's see. What's this question? What are some of the most important SQL concepts a data engineer must master? After you've built your baseline, obviously coding in SQL, because that's what everyone needs. From there, again, you build up your data warehousing, ETL, like how you build your data pipelines. Those are the core next two skills that must be learned. And then the other thing is just like understanding your role in the business and how you drive value. How do your data sets actually drive value for everyone? So I think that's kind of that next step. You don't have to worry about that one. Like you can't really pick it up without working at a company. I mean, maybe if you're, you can really think through things, but I don't think most people would pick that up without working at a company. So, you'll work at a company, and I think that's the way to kind of pick it up. What are some effective ways to identify and select a reliable data source or provider for my project? I guess I'm curious what you mean by reliable, because, you just need to build a project. It doesn't have to be perfect. If your data is a little off, I mean, it's about, I think, showing that you have the skill set, showing that you think about how you would do data quality, not necessarily meaning you have the 100% perfect data quality for a project that's on the side. Obviously, the company is different, but if it's just, your project, I wouldn't be so concerned about it. Yeah, I mean, in terms of finding reliable ones, there's the GitHub page. It's like if you look up GitHub data sources, GitHub APIs, like free APIs. I think it's usually what I Google. There's a whole page on it, and then somewhere in there they have open data sources. Again, you can also just scrape websites that let you scrape them. That's always a great way to kind of get more information. So those are usually the ways I look for project data. Let's see. I've definitely answered this a little, like how do I think ChatGPT and AI will affect the data landscape? I mean, in its current phase, it'll definitely be more of an assistant. It'll be that like whole Jarvis, if you've seen Iron Man, that Jarvis AI where he like would talk to it and be like, hey, like do this for me or do that for me. Hey, I have this problem. Can you help like calculate something? Or I remember like they were looking for some new element and, he talked to it. And I don't remember who discovered it, but like there are just certain calculations that I think are harder to do. So if you can have something that does it, it's great. Honestly, like in the last 3 weeks, I haven't had to code too much because I've asked ChatGPT just to be like, hey, ChatGPT, I need whatever. Code me something that does this. And then again, I've had to make a few adjustments, had to productionize it, but it can generally like just take away that like that level of thinking. And because I'm consulting and because I have to do so many other things, it's really nice that I can just tell something else to do it. It's almost like having an employee, right? It's like, oh, I don't have to code something. I can ask, ChatGPT to code it so that I can actually figure out how I'm going to implement it, which is a different problem. So, I eventually do imagine it'll be more, but I think in the next few years, that's what it's going to be. It's really going to be a tool, a helper that helps us out, and then just, again, makes you 30 to 50% more productive. I think it's finally that kind of car moment, right? Where it's, if you would have asked people what they wanted, a couple years ago in the programming world, I don't think they would have said like an AI assistant. They might have said like, I don't know, smoother ways to, push code to GitHub, making that whole process smoother or something. I don't know. But I don't think anyone would have said like, oh, something that already codes for me. And I think that's made a big difference. Let's see. Someone's already asked how important is that? So could you please recommend some channels or any medium where I can learn SQL if you know Alex the Analyst, he's got a baseline SQL course. From there, what I'd recommend, so once you've built your baseline SQL skills, right? You understand select, you understand where, you understand your analytic functions or window functions. Then I would go to like something like BigQuery or somewhere that offers free, like there's some that have free data sets, and go query them. Go put together a data analysis project. You don't even have to like put the data into a database. I always remember like when I was first learning SQL, if I wanted to learn more about SQL and like take on some of these projects, I'd have to like set up, MySQL Server or Microsoft SQL Server or something like that, and put the data in. And I'd always put the data in, and it would never insert correctly, and have to, mess around with it, just so I could analyze it. And now you guys can just go to BigQuery, or I think Snowflake even has some free open source, not open source, just open free data sets that you can query, and do some projects, and not have to go through the whole setup. It's right there. Oh, and yeah, someone put in, there's some SQL courses. This is great. Yeah, I have used ChatGPT to create ETL scripts. Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, it's hard not to. Like, it's hard not to just ask ChatGPT to write some stuff for you. Is there a practice of testing in DE? Like, do you write unit tests for pipelines and stuff? Yeah, no, you definitely generally write some level of unit tests. So like there's like, sometimes if you're a DE, you'll write functions, or not functions, but I guess you can call them functions, like basically utility functions. There's what I'm looking for. You'll write utility functions. And for those, you'll generally test them. Basically, what would I say? You generally test them the same way you test code. The other level of test that you often do is on data sets, essentially, or tables that you create. And that can range. Some people like to do like column checks. So like, how null is this column? Like, and what's the threshold that this null is not acceptable? There are category checks. So these are checks that essentially, I once worked at a company where we had like state abbreviations, right? Like there's 50 states. I learned though, with abbreviations, I think it's more like 52 because there's like territories like Puerto Rico. But yeah, so we did a check that like, hey, it's a valid state. And we were like, well, of course it's going to be a valid state. They must be using a drop down on the other side. So why would you have invalid states in this category or in this field? And lo and behold, they did have invalid states. It was very funny because we're like, how do you get this? Like the front end shouldn't have this. But that's one way you can test, is like category checks are always solid. Like, that there's only so many categories that should exist. And you assume that people are good on the front end and make sure that those are protected, but sometimes they're not. Oh, version control system. That's what you meant. I was like, what is VIA? Yeah. I'm trying to think, is like, version control is usually what I think people reference it as in what I know. But yes, GitHub's always, and Git are always worth knowing. And I'll forever do the whole Kleenex thing where I'm just like, GitHub. And it's like, well, okay, I mean Git, but obviously it's all under the whole Git thing. Fun fact, Facebook doesn't use Git. They use Mercurial, which is slightly different. Apparently, Git couldn't handle compiling code or something. So they're like, we got to use something different. Let's see. My company uses Snowflake, but looking at job postings, almost every company is asking for Spark and Databricks. Will this become a bottleneck of my career growth? No, I don't think so. I think, one, you can pick up Spark and Databricks. It's not that difficult. I think, and this is actually something I felt. I remember feeling like this when I was working at one company, because we were working on like Oracle and SQL Server. And I think at the time, everyone was like on Hadoop. And I was like, oh man, I'm so behind. Like I'm working on this stuff, how am I going to grow? And I still got more jobs. I worked at, Facebook, and I think overall, there's always opportunities, and you can always, take your skills and learn more. So I don't think it necessarily bottlenecks it. Now, if you don't make any changes and you only become the Snowflake person for the next, 10 years, maybe. But if, over the next few years, you have, a mix of experiences, a mix of approaches, I think then there's something that opens up there. The code worked perfectly well. Looks like humans are not needed for Python programmers. Yeah, I'm going to be curious on that. I foresee that you'll still need some people to program, but we'll see. That'll be interesting. Question: what is a decent salary for a DE Databricks entry level job? Oof, that's a good question. There is some dependency on where you live. Like even in the U.S. at this point, like there's such a discrepancy in pay between San Francisco in Missouri, just because of the cost of living. It costs 3,000. Like, I actually have a friend moving to the Bay, and he's gonna be in San Jose, which isn't the Bay at all, really. It's like 40 miles away from the Bay, and I think he's paying $3,300 for a 1 bedroom, which honestly I'd say is, like, if you're in the Bay Area, it's affordable. When I was looking for apartments in the Bay, I think it was like 7,800. I'm looking at 79 people. I was like 3,500 for a 1 bedroom. So it does depend a little bit about where you're at. But I imagine, like, in the U.S., that could probably range, like, entry level. Talking about entry level, probably range from anywhere from like 65 to maybe 95K. If you don't have too much experience, you'll make decent money. But entry level, they basically take some companies will take advantage of that situation because they know people want jobs, and so they'll pay them money, but they'll definitely be like, you'll be like, I have friends who are making twice as much as or almost twice as much as an entry level job. So yeah, you could definitely find a few maybe 100K level jobs for entry level, but more than likely, I imagine it'll be just under 100K. But then you want to just switch jobs almost immediately, unless it's a tech company. Then it will definitely pay you like 120K. Okay, kind of already talked about ChatGPT, how GPT will impact data engineering. This is interesting. How should you approach an automation project? It's a little bit of a vague question. In terms of how I approach most of my automated work, I'll generally like code it first. Like, I'll just be like, oh, let's code this up myself. Let's run it. Okay, it runs. Then I'll kind of continually add more things to it, and then figure out how I'm going to automate it. This is why people generally like things like Airflow, because if you're like me, you grew up in a world where your version of automating something, then you did what I just said. You build a script, you kind of test it out, you get it to work. You maybe add a few, testing and whatever edge cases around it, and then you just set it up in cron, and then it runs. And so that's why people like Airflow, because when Airflow came out, it was like cron adjacent. Like, it clearly operated, and you could think like cron, but you could do all the things that you couldn't do when you just use cron, which was, I can set up dependencies. So I can say task A runs, then task B, then task C and D. And then if C and D don't pass or don't complete, then don't do, F, etc. So that's generally how I automate. And in terms of like projects, I mean, I'd find something that you enjoy. Like, maybe you enjoy sports. If you enjoy sports, you can build like yourself a little notification system that maybe just pushes to Slack or sends you an email or something. Just something straightforward and gives you an update on what happened, right? Like, you can even use OpenAI, right? Like, you're like, hey, I'm really interested in whatever UFC fights. I want to know what fights are coming up, and I want to know what people are saying about it. So that'd be an interesting project, right? Like, you could have it like maybe scroll Twitter. I think that's becoming a little more difficult now. You could have something like that, like scroll some website, scrape some data, have OpenAI kind of condense it all for you, tell you the important points, tell you who's fighting, and then send it to your email or something. I like UFC, so that's why I said that. When you write SQL queries, do you think about writing the most optimized SQL queries, focus on performance, or do you write queries to get the job done? I think most people would say step one, make it good enough to get the job done, and then optimize, right? Like, optimize over time, because if you spend all day optimizing, you'll never get your work done. I remember, so I have not a bad habit. I just really enjoy watching like engineering videos, and I've been watching like this civil engineer that talks about like building bridges and things of that nature. And something he brought up is like, he's like, oh, well, why do civil engineers build things that they know will only last for, let's say, 20 years? Like, they literally build it and they're like, oh, we built this for 25 years. Then we either need to maintain it or do something to fix it, or we need to take it down and replace it. He's like, why do people do this? And he's like, well, it's because we have a combination of restraints, right? Like, we have so much money, we have to build it with so much time. Sure, we could build a bridge that could last forever, but it would cost so much money. It would cost so much so much time that it's just not worth it in the end. It won't provide value for anyone. So in general, you want to build something that works, and obviously isn't costing your company hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of performance. and then you optimize when you have time. And it's always a fun kind of project. I remember doing those projects where you would like figure out what you should optimize. You'd be like, okay, these are the ETL steps that are taking 10 hours. How do we make that down to 1 or 30 minutes or 5 minutes? And then you got to kind of play that game of like, okay, how do we improve this whole thing? So yeah, I wouldn't focus so much on building your perfect ETL, because then it keeps you from delivering, or whatever, SQL, because then it keeps you from delivering. So focus on delivering value, and then you'll optimize over time. So I think that's a good way. Again, that's also insinuating that you're not building such a terrible query that's going to be impossible to optimize. But yeah. Let's see. I have a lot of questions. Oh, someone else. Well, thank you. I don't know who this is, but thank you. This is too kind. Let's see. Do I have any advice for freelancing and data engineering? I imagine if you're just getting started, it's about figuring out where you're going to get clients from. I'm starting a course on like how to do data analytics consulting, and like I'm going to do a live on this one for people who are part of that, because one of the things that I realize is like, you kind of go backwards. Like someone asked me like, how do I make 6 figures freelancing quickly? And I was like, well, quickly is an interesting point, but the problem you're trying to solve is, how do you find clients, essentially, right? At the end of the day. And so you have to pick a place where to find clients. Do you go to Upwork? I know Shashank, who was on I think our last live, talked about, he did Upwork. You can do, if you're good at marketing or in branding, like I am, that's what you do. You like market, you brand, you post on LinkedIn, and that works. Like I honestly don't do a lot in terms of sales. Like I just, my sales is all of my LinkedIn posts and my YouTube videos and my Substack, and that gets me clients. I honestly don't do much in terms of like sales, but you could be good at sales. Like you're good at like knowing who to email, sending emails that get people to buy things from you or to, ask you. You could be good at networking. So you could have people that that need help, they can ask. So that's generally the first thing and the first problem you need to solve. I then have people who are like, oh, how much should I charge? And I'm like, well, if you're just starting, don't worry about that. Get clients, and then you can figure out, how to play the money game of how much should I charge? How do I get, convince people to pay me more? Those are not your problems right now. Your problems when you start out is, how do I get clients? Step 1. Real-time data streaming is becoming popular these days. Do you see a trend for these to start learning Java? Consider that's the best language for Kafka and Flink. My hope is that streaming becomes easier. Obviously, yeah. I mean, Kafka is always solid. Maybe I don't know if you need Java. I feel like, yeah, I feel like I see a lot of people using Scala for that, but Kafka is always solid. I'm really hoping, because it's weird to me that this is still not fully solved, that Kafka does not become like the end all be all solution. I see a lot of people like when they're like, oh, we want to do CDC, we want to do streaming. And they're like, okay, I know this, I use Kafka. And it's just like, well, that just seems like an extra solution. But I've seen a few companies implement where it's like they implement it without even using engineers. They have like analytics people kind of implementing it. It's not that they can't, it just feels like they should be spending their time somewhere else. So I feel like streaming needs to become easier for it to become fully adopted, but that's just my thought. And there are a few solutions that I'm talking to. Estuary is one, Strim is another, and a few others that are trying to make streaming data easy. The funny thing is, like, then they stream the data into your data warehouse, but then the data is still batched after that, right? Like you've streamed it raw into your data warehouse, sure, but then you don't have a process that continues to transform it. So that's the other side that I think gets missed. This is, how can I become a data engineer without knowing how to code? I feel like it's very hard to become a data engineer without knowing how to code. But, and this is why I don't necessarily see ChatGPT as a bad thing, and similar models. Like we generalize it as ChatGPT, but it's like, some agent or some model that can help you write code better, right? Yeah, I mean, like, imagine if there are people who kind of get the business side and can now and get just enough programming that they can become super useful, right? Like you reduce that barrier to now just someone asking something to write code for you that actually works. So that's where I see a lot of value being added. So I don't know, in 2 years, you might not need to know how to code, at least not fully, right? Like you might just need to know how to like speak the logic into existence, which is its own skill. Not necessarily prompt engineering, just a different set of skills where it's like, oh, how do I actually give this, request? So, maybe you can become one, but I definitely always learn how to. Like I wouldn't try to skip it. Not sure if you've done this before, but would you be open to creating project-based videos like Alex the Analyst does? I think that would help. I've got a few project-based videos. I've got one that I actually completed. I've got one, like two other sets of videos, projects like 1 through 2. I have like a third video I need to put out that I have not put out. I apologize. I think especially then I was like getting really busy on the business side. And everyone always asks how I do so much. And I'm like, well, partially by having priorities, and YouTube tends to be the place that you'll see, like you can kind of tell when I'm busy because I will suddenly start putting out list videos. Like you probably noticed that recently. I don't think I put out a video for a while. I actually have a video ready to go, but yeah. I do want to do more project videos. And if you don't see mine, Darshil has a lot of great ones. If you haven't looked him up, look up his channel. He's slowly catching up to me in subscribers. So I'm like, oh no, just because it's hard not to feel a little competitive. But he's putting out great videos, so I'm like, well, he's putting out great videos. He's helping out the community. So go check out Darshil. He has a lot of great project videos. Let's see. I'm starting my first role as an MLE. Congratulations. And I have time to upskill. I'm doing projects relevant to their stack. What key DE skills do you often see overlooked in new devs? Thank you. I think a lot of the skills that tend to get overlooked, like because you're doing all the technical stuff, right? Like technical is great. I think the stuff, and you'll just learn this by operating in the business, right? Is figuring out how to talk to the business and understand what they want from you. When they ask you to build something, understanding like, oh, here's what they want. So if you really want like that kind of stuff, I'd maybe even look into some books. There's I think there's a book called like Making of a Manager, which obviously you don't want to be a manager, but I think there's certain skill sets there that are useful. Oh, I think another one's like Crucial Conversations or something. What is it? Look this up. Google something by shooting. I think something like Crucial Conversations. But yeah, like learning how to do those things, I think is super useful for tech people, because the tech skills will get you so far, but getting really good at those soft things will be helpful. Let's see. This is like someone's. I do have a video about like data engineering, and also thanks you're the person who gave me the $2, so thank you. I do have a video about Snowflakes versus Databricks. The interesting thing about Snowflakes versus Databricks is I see a lot of companies have both. Actually, I know many companies have both. I've seen people use both. Sometimes it's broken up by use case, right? Like sometimes it's like, okay, Snowflake is where we store the data and Databricks is where we process it, right? Like Databricks is maybe slightly cheaper. Other times it's by team. It's like, oh, well, Snowflake is for the data engineering, data warehousing team, and Databricks is for the data science MLE team. Although some data engineers love Databricks. So it really will depend. Snowflake, in my opinion, is a more complete product. Like it doesn't feel like 3 products taped together, which is what Databricks feels like. Databricks is cheaper, but I think it requires a higher level of skill set. Snowflake, I think, can be more forgiving in terms of you can run on almost anything, but because you can run on almost anything, it can be more expensive, right? Like because it's like, oh, you can run a query, it'll do it fast, it'll also be expensive. So I think that's the other side there. But yeah, I think that's generally like the differences. It's sometimes by use case, sometimes just by preference, right? Someone's like, I like Snowflake, I like Databricks, and that tends to drive some of it as well. But honestly, so many companies I've seen have all of them. I've seen companies have Snowflake, BigQuery, Databricks, Redshift, all at one company, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is chaos. But and it's at more companies than you think. I think that's the other thing. It's like there's more companies than you think, especially once you start getting to enterprise level. Because what ends up happening, especially like enterprises, or mid-level, is there's a lot of companies that merge. So like over time, you just start getting all of these different solutions that exist. And slowly people try to like, consolidate, but it takes so much time. It's another reason I'm not worried about data engineering work, having work, because all of that, like companies coming together, companies leaving, companies doing all this stuff, just creates more and more work for data engineers, for better or for worse. You're going to love it and hate it all at once. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is both great. I like the work. I have fun, but also I feel like just last week we integrated this other thing and now it's getting pulled out and now we're switching the ERP system. So yeah, we're getting close to here on time. So I'm trying to get through all these questions, but there's way more questions. Let me just make sure no one else is sent over or whatever. Civil engineers also suggest the most expensive solutions. I guess I don't have experience there, but maybe I wonder if you're referring to like maybe experience with building houses. My dad definitely has some experiences with civil engineers and building houses. But yeah, I don't know if anyone's watched some of those videos, but they're very pleasant. I don't know why they're slightly cathartic. When there's this guy on YouTube. I don't know what his channel is called. He was explaining like how different components of dams work, and I'm just like over here like I could sit here all day watching these videos. And I'm like, it's like a weird, like, it's not junk food, but like in a weird way it is, because like it's not like it helps me in my day to day. At least I don't think it does. Maybe it does. But it's just like oddly cathartic and like almost brain level ASMR, where it's like you feel like you're learning, so it kind of feels good. So it's kind of soothing in a weird way to watch these videos about how things function. Like dam gates. Like I don't know why do I care about dam gates? Or on the other side, engineering failures. Like watching a dam fail, and it's like, why did this dam fail? It's like, wow, that's some minute thing about water getting underneath the dam or something can destroy a whole dam. That's wild. Let's see. So, oh, this is going back. I keep meaning to replace this data engineering roadmap video because this one's like 2 years old at this point. So in your roadmap, the fourth item where it says build second project, you recommend specific tools to scrape, create dimensional model, and load to a data warehouse. I mean, you can use Python. You can use just about anything that can scrape. I mean, I know some people who like writing bash, right? Like if you really want to write things like that, that's also an option. There's a few solutions that you can use too that can scrape for you. But I'd say if you're just getting started, don't pay for a solution. Just code something in like Beautiful Soup, scrape some way data down and parse it from there. So yeah. All right, I'm gonna wrap up here soon. So let's see. What is this? Hey, I just made it live. My website for oh, cool. What's next? Wait for customers. That's exciting. Well, first of all, congrats. I mean, in a weird way, yes, wait for customers, but you have to be doing some sort of like what I think a lot of salespeople call it is motions, right? You have to be doing things that will likely get you customers. So that means you need to pick a certain area that you're going to focus on, whether it's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it's networking, whether it's going to like the other way that also works well is partnering with other consultants who have a lot of business and need help, but you need to do something that gets clients to your door, right? Oh, for C2C, interesting. I'm curious what you mean C2C, like consulting, like, yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, somehow you need to get people to see it. And again, that's why I post on LinkedIn. That's why I post blogs. That's why I put YouTube out, because the more people get familiar with you, like with marketing is not about seeing someone or an ad one time. I think that's the mistake some companies make. They're like, oh, we spent $1 million on this one ad, and like that's it. It's like, well, it's that one ad plus the years of ads that people have been seeing, that then they're familiar with you, and then they're like, oh, okay, this person is the person that I use for this problem that I have. So yeah, you have to do something that gets people's attention. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up for today. I want to appreciate. Well, first of all, thanks all for watching. I think I'm gonna put out a video right after this. So if you want to watch that video, it'll be out here in like 2 to 3 minutes. But other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. If you're starting your weekends, enjoy that. If you're going to bed, good night, and thank you all. See you next time. Bye.